Hey, thanks for tuning back in to Genuine Questions. I want to pick up where we left off on the last video, which was about the coronavirus and the vaccine and the misinformation that we were getting from the people that we were supposed to be looking to as the experts. And in this part, I want to talk about how they were able to manipulate the public opinion through propaganda, censorship, and some coercion techniques. And then that will lead us into the third part, part 3, where we will talk about how those techniques and tactics that they use to manipulate the public, historically, they have not great outcomes. And we're going to look at the possible motivations for why they might be doing that. But for this video, I just want to start by looking at the elements of psychological coercion, and then we're going to talk about the parallels between them and the government's COVID narrative. In a psychologically coercive environment, the victim is forced to adapt in a series of small, invisible steps. Each step is sufficiently small that the subject does not notice the changes or identify the coercive nature of the process until much later, if ever. These tactics can be reinforced in group setting by well-intended but deceived friends and allies of the victim. This keeps the victim from setting up the ego defenses normally maintained in known adversarial situations. So we've talked about that concept before, the frog in boiling water, this small series of almost invisible steps. So if you throw a frog into boiling water, it's going to get scalded and jump right out. But if you put the frog in room temperature water and then incrementally turn up the heat until it's boiling, it's not going to notice those subtle changes in temperature, and it will eventually boil to death. So, concept we've discussed quite a bit on this YouTube channel. If you don't want to take my word for it, it's in the Psychological magazine, so it's obviously a real thing. Psychological coercion overcomes the individual's critical thinking abilities and free will, apart from any appeal to informed judgment. Victims gradually lose their ability to make independent decisions and exercise informed consent. Their emotional defenses, cognitive processes, values, ideas, attitudes, conduct, and ability to reason are undermined, and the decisions are no longer through meaningful free choice, rationality, or the inherent merit or value of the ideas or propositions being presented. The tactics of psychological coercion often involve anxiety and stress and fall into 7 main categories. Restrictive techniques such as exact repetition of routine activities, sleep restriction, and or social restriction, like lockdowns, not being able to go out in public and see your family and loved ones. Number 2, establishment of control over victims' social environment, time, and sources of social support by creating social isolation, removing contact with family and friends who promote self-esteem, independence, positivity, and sense of well-being. Economic controls may contribute, like not letting you go to work and being reliant on the $2,000 checks that the government sometimes decides to send out. Rejection of alternate information and separate opinions. Rules exist about permissible topics to discuss. Communication is highly controlled. Just like there's certain topics you're not allowed to talk about on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, or certain news topics that they don't discuss because you just get labeled a conspiracy theorist, or they silence and censor you, which we'll talk about here more in a little bit. Number 4, forcing the victim to reevaluate the most central aspects of his or her experience of self and prior conduct in negative ways. The victim is made to feel like a bad person. Efforts are designed to destabilize and undermine the subject's basic consciousness, reality awareness, worldview, emotional control, and defense mechanisms. The subject questions, doubts, and reinterprets his or her life and adopts a new reality. Number 5, creating a sense of powerlessness by subjecting the victim to intense and frequently confusing, conflicting actions and situations which undermine the victim's self-confidence and judgment, like the ever-changing guidelines on 6 feet, 3 feet, mask, no mask, 2 masks, 1 shot, 2 boosters, 3 boosters. It's constantly changing. You don't rely on your own thought process anymore. We just have to blindly turn over to these experts, even though they're rules or reality, the restrictions, they are not based on anything that you would think makes an ounce of common sense. Number 6, creating strong, aversive, and emotional arousals in the subject by reactions such as intense humiliation, loss of privilege, social isolation, social status changes, intense guilt, anxiety, and manipulation. So you'll be ostracized from public, you won't be able to go to restaurants or concerts, you won't be able to see your family if you don't follow along with the vaccination program. You are now a social pariah because of your vaccination status. And then number 7, intimidation of the victim by implied power, size, voice amplitude, or implied threat. Psychological coercion can be applied to such a degree that the victim's capacity to make informed or free choices becomes inhibited. The victim becomes unable to make the normal, wise, or balanced decisions which they most likely or normally would have made, had they not been manipulated. The cumulative effort of psychological coercion can be an even more effective form of undue influence than pain, torture, drugs, or the use of physical force or threats. So there's a lot of parallels there between what the government is doing to us and what this psychological magazine outlines as psychological coercion. But now I wanted to show you some of those things that seems like propaganda to me to try to manipulate us into doing something for the greater good. You're protecting everybody else by going along with this program. Don't be selfish. You're a bad person if you don't do this. You're putting other people's lives at risk. So that goes back to what they were just talking about, where you're made to feel like a bad person if you don't go along with this. And so I want to start off the propaganda slide here with one of the commercials they did encouraging everybody to go get vaccinated.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans, and soon they will be available to everyone.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
I want to go back to work and I want to be able to move around.
To visit with Michelle's mom, to hug her and see her on her birthday.
You know what I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
We've lost enough people and we've suffered enough damage.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, it's important for our fellow citizens to get vaccinated.
I'm getting vaccinated because we want this pandemic to end as soon as possible.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
Now it's up to you.
So whenever all of these people come together to try to support a cause or an agenda, that's a pretty big red flag that it's something that you want to stay far away from. And when you just watch that commercial, they didn't try to persuade you on the science or appeal to, your intellect or common sense or explain how they know that these brand new shots are safe and effective. They just use those psychological manipulation tactics. You want to get back to your family. You want to get to go to baseball games. You want to do it to protect everybody else. They're just going right back to that psychological playbook on how you brainwash and manipulate people. There's that old adage, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I'm going to illustrate that here with this example of how Barack Obama behaved during the Flint water crisis. If everybody remembers that, the water in Flint was poisoned, and Barack Obama goes to Flint to what the residents think is to declare a natural disaster, so FEMA will come in and they'll be able to replace their pipes and get clean drinking water. But instead, I'm going to show you the video of what Barack Obama actually did when he went to Flint.
I want a glass of water.
Get a bottle. Bottle water.
I want a glass of water. Everybody settle down. This is a feisty crowd. Thank you. I really did need a glass of water. This is not a stunt.
What?
He wet his lips. He did not drink it. He didn't sip it. He wet his lips.
There was an audible gasp in the audience. People were just like absolutely dejected. Why would you do that?
I am sure that somewhere when I was 2 years old, I was taking a chip of paint, tasting it, and I got some lead.
Yeah, that's like talking about like, well, I didn't wear a seatbelt and I'm fine. It's like, but there were tons of people that died.
Backstage, the president, sitting at the table with the criminal governor, decided to perform his stunt all over again.
You know, generally I have not been doing stunts here, but, you know.
It felt like he minimized like what people are actually going through and struggling with.
We were holding on to hope that he would declare a disaster area. A disaster would give us FEMA, it would give us pipe replacement, get engineers in here. Then we could get Medicare for all the residents of Flint. As soon as he took a drink of the water and said everything's fine, that was that.
So you heard him say there, generally I haven't been doing stunts, but here we go, and pretends to take another sip of that water backstage, saying generally I don't do stunts, but here we go. That implies you're doing a stunt. And that's exactly what he was doing. As you saw in those video clips, he doesn't drink that water. He knows that it's poison. He is just pretending to take a sip to be patronizing to these people that look up to him and support him and think that he is there because he has their back and he's going to help them. But he doesn't do that. He, for whatever his reasons are, decides to pretend to drink this poison water to convince these people that it's okay for them to drink this poison water. So why would I ever be convinced that because Barack Obama is on TV saying, oh, I got the vaccine, you should get the vaccine, it's safe. Again, fool me once, shame on you. Fool you twice, shame on me. And in that clip there, that's from the Michael Moore, one of the documentaries they did. I can't remember which one. I don't like Michael Moore as a person, but he does make some pretty interesting movies. And he refers to the governor of Michigan as the criminal governor, and I'm going to show you why here. So how this water crisis came about is in an effort to save money. Rick Snyder, the people in the city, they decided to switch the water supply to this polluted Flint River. And instead of whatever their clean source of drinking water had previously been, they did it to save money. And the issues and the problems with it, the quality of the water came to light when the GM plant in Flint, Michigan, their parts started to corrode. They have rust on them from the water that is now coming out of the drinking water supply source of this polluted Flint River. And so GM complains to the government, and they are able to get their water switched back to the fresh water, and the people that live there who are trying to raise their families and have clean drinking water and water to bathe and cook and all of those things, they are left still drinking the polluted Flint water, even though the government knows that it's corroding the engines and the supplies over at GM. And as one of the GM employees said, if it's too corrosive for an engine, what's it doing to the inside of a person? Pretty good question to ask, but the government didn't care. So you can say that it was a bad decision, but they were trying to save money. And then once the information came out, they realized, oh, we need to spend the money and go back to what we were doing. They said, no, it's not good enough for GM or big political donors, but we're just going to go ahead and screw over the residents that live here. That is, I agree, that's criminal at that point. Just in case you think that, oh, like Obama was saying, it's no big deal, all of us have eaten a chip of paint that had lead in it or whatever as a kid, this is what the impacts of this water were on the people that live there. A story of environmental injustice and bad decision-making, the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, began in 2014 when the city switched its drinking water supply from Detroit's system to the Flint River in a cost-saving move. Inadequate treatment and testing of the water resulted in a series of water quality and health issues for Flint residents, issues that were chronically ignored, overlooked, and discounted by government officials, even as complaints mounted that the foul-smelling, discolored, and off-tasting water piped into Flint homes for 18 months was causing skin rashes, hair loss, and itchy skin. The Michigan Civil Rights Commission, a state-established body, concluded that poor governmental response to the Flint crisis was a result of systemic racism. Later studies would reveal that the contaminated water was also contributing to a doubling, and in some cases tripling, of the incidence of elevated blood lead levels in the city's children, imperiling the health of its youngest generation. Michigan Governor Rick Snyder appointed an emergency manager, basically an unelected official chosen to set local policy, to oversee and cut city costs. This precipitated the tragic decision in 2013 to end the city's 5-decade practice of piping treated water for its residents from Detroit in favor of a cheaper alternative, temporarily pumping the water from the Flint River until a new water pipeline from Lake Huron was built. Although the river water was highly corrosive, Flint officials failed to treat it, and lead leached out from the aging pipes into thousands of homes. Soon after the city began supplying residents with Flint water in April 2014, residents started complaining that the water from their taps looked, smelled, and tasted foul. Despite protests from residents lugging jugs of discolored water, officials maintained that the water was safe. Flint's water supply was plagued by more than lead. The city switched from Detroit water to Flint water coincided with an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, a severe form of pneumonia that killed 12 and sickened at least 87 people between June 2014 and October 2015. The third largest outbreak of Legionnaire's disease recorded in U.S. history, as well as the discovery in 2014 of fecal coliform bacteria in city water, which was likely a result of the city's failure to maintain sufficient chlorine in its water mains to disinfect the water. Ironically, the city's corrective measure, adding more chlorine without addressing other underlying issues, created a new problem: elevated levels of cancer-causing chemicals that are byproducts of the chlorination of water. So it's not just picking a chip of paint off the wall and ingesting a little bit of lead. It's triple the amount of lead that is safe to be in your blood supply. They're getting cancer, they're getting pneumonia, they're dying, they're having hair loss and skin rashes, and they are constantly being gaslit by their public officials telling them that this water is safe. And so, yeah, if Barack Obama is willing to participate in that gaslighting of the public and endangering of the public for whatever benefits were happening behind the scenes, then I have to assume now, since there's really been no apology or accountability or contrition from him for doing that, I'm skeptical with any other public health measures he's willing to advocate for the public. Now I want to show you this other propaganda commercial here that is normalizing myocarditis in children. So myocarditis has been talked about quite a bit as a potential side effect of the vaccine, a rare side effect of the vaccine, but it's also a rare side effect of COVID, so it's in the public conversation. But up until the last year, it wasn't something that you ever heard talked about really ever, but especially in terms of children. And now we're starting to see commercials like the one that I'm about to show you, where they're just trying to make it seem like, this is just a thing that happens to kids, no big deal. Everybody gets myocarditis. Nothing to worry about.
I've been into fashion since I can remember. But one day I had a stomachache so bad I didn't want to do anything. The team at New York Presbyterian said it was actually my heart. It was severely swollen, something called myocarditis. But doctors gave me medicines and used machines to control my heartbeat. They saved me. So now I can become the next great fashion designer.
And another new thing that they're trying to normalize here since the last couple of years is this SADS We've all heard of SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome. Now, all of a sudden, there's SADS, the sudden adult death syndrome. And even as recently as Christmas Eve, just a month ago, these info articles were coming out to, again, make this seem like not a big deal. This is, scientists have been studying this for a long time. This is way common in the medical community. You've just never heard about it before, and we never talked about it before. So what is sudden adult death syndrome? The experts say that sudden adult death syndrome, also known as SADS, occurs when a person under the age of 40 years old suffers a sudden death without a known cause after an autopsy and toxicology screen. And so the fact checkers have been working overtime to let everybody know we have no idea what causes SADS. Obviously, that's like the whole point of it, is it's a death without a known cause after an autopsy and toxicology screen. But the one thing for sure that we can tell you that doesn't cause it is the COVID vaccine. Anti-vaccine commentators and conservative politicians have been sharing a tabloid story about a medical condition that has nothing to do with COVID-19 vaccines, but they're baselessly suggesting that there is a connection. The story was about sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, or SADS, which is not new. It's incorrectly referred to SADS as sudden adult death syndrome. So it's not incorrectly referring to it as that. That's what the experts on Help Desk are calling it. That's what people are calling it in the news headlines. So it's not just conspiracy theorists and conservative politicians that have made up this name to create vaccine hesitancy. It's what it's also known as. All right, and the last propaganda commercial here that I want to show you is a funny one. It's a clip from Tim Dillon's podcast where he shows this PSA that the Arkansas Health Department put out to encourage members of their community to get vaccinated. And nobody can break this video down funnier than Tim Dillon can, so I'm just going to play the clip of him talking about it.
Who in Arkansas thought this was a good idea?
During the pandemic, my lifestyle drastically changed. My income came to a screeching halt. You have to understand, I'm a hustler. I'm a legit entrepreneur. I sell things. I come in contact with people all the time. I have to stay safe. I didn't have a choice but to trust the vaccine.
Why does this seem racist? Why do I start to cringe when he's like, I'm a hustler, I sell things? What are we doing here? But he's just posted up on an old Ford Mustang in a parking lot being an entrepreneur. He's not at a desk. He's not in an office. They didn't put him in an office. The state of Arkansas did not put him in an office. They didn't put him in a suit. No. They didn't put him anywhere near a place of business. He's in a parking lot on a Ford Mustang.
I didn't have a choice but to trust the vaccine. If you live the type of lifestyle that I live,
doing what?
You're out here in these streets,
what?
Hustling, an entrepreneur like me, why not do it safely? So I want
if you're out here in these streets hustling, why not do it safely? What is your job? What job description is, quote, out here in these streets? This is from the Arkansas Department of Health. They're making him seem like a drug dealer. This is literally saying, if you are also a drug dealer, get the vaccine. I mean, that's literally what it's saying. They're going, hey, if you sell drugs, you may not think it's important to get the vaccine, but you should.
So I want everybody to take this seriously. Take a shot at staying healthy.
Take a shot.
Get the vaccine.
Wouldn't it be funny if it was like a gang war at the end?
That's the weird.
Take a shot. Like, should he even went like, take a shot, just like that with the gun, like right to the camera?
Okay, so propaganda has two elements to it. It's what they put in front of your face and they want you to see, and then there is the censorship component of the things that they want to keep out of the public conversation. We talked about in that first bullet points of the psychological coercion, that conflicting, dissenting opinions that make you question the narrative, like you're not allowed to talk about those things. So they censor those topics from being allowed to be discussed in the public conversation. So the first clip that I'm going to show you about censorship here is one of the clips of Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci going back and forth in one of the Senate hearings. And I'm always baffled when people seem to think that Fauci came out on top in those conversations. I have to see that as a dead giveaway, that you did not watch it for yourself and you are just repeating a received opinion that you saw on the news, or that I just can't believe that you actually watched it and came away thinking that Fauci was the one that looked good and honest and forthcoming in these conversations. And so before I show you this first clip, where Rand Paul talks about Fauci's, some of his private emails where he is discussing censoring these dissenting opinions about COVID-19, I want to show you this news clip of Dr. Fauci talking about himself being science and how if you criticize him, you're criticizing science. Because Rand Paul brings it up, and I just want everybody to see really fast that Rand Paul is spot on with what he is describing and what comments he is attributing to Fauci. Fauci's going to try to deny it, but we're going to listen to Fauci actually say it before we watch it, just so we all know that Rand Paul is accurately quoting Fauci here.
It's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on.
All right, so before I play the Rand Paul clip, I just have to point out how ridiculous that is. So Fauci himself said that when he told everybody to not wear masks on 60 Minutes because they weren't really effective and you touch your face and you get schmutz in your mask, that he only said that because they were concerned that there was going to be a mask shortage and they didn't want to run out of masks for healthcare workers. So that is not you stating things based on science. That is you stating things based on supply level and government policy, not science. If you were speaking on science and you would say, hey, masks do work, it's good for you to make a cloth mask, do what you can, blah, 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 but don't buy the surgical N95 masks or whatever because we don't want to run out for the people that are in, high risk exposure jobs in the hospital. That would be speaking to both the science and the public policy, but he wasn't doing that. And if you criticize him for doing that, that is an attack on science. So, ridiculous. But I like this exchange between him and Rand Paul, where Rand Paul calls him out for, in his emails, talking about these other scientists who are part of the Great Barrington Declaration, which is basically just saying, like, hey, you don't need to lock everybody down. You need to quarantine the sick and the vulnerable and then let everybody else go on with their lives. And Fauci and some other government scientists were discussing behind the scenes how they can publicly smear these people and take them down. Not why our science is better than your science. It's just we need to malign them and make sure nobody takes them seriously.
In an email exchange with Dr. Collins, you conspire, and I quote here directly from the email, to create a quick and devastating published takedown of three prominent epidemiologists from Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. Apparently, there's a lot of fringe epidemiologists at Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. A published takedown, though, doesn't exactly conjure up the image of a dispassionate scientist. Instead of engaging them on the merits, you and Dr. Collins sought to smear them as fringe and take them down, and not in journals, in lay press. This is not only antithetical to the scientific method, it's the epitome of cheap politics, and it's reprehensible, Dr. Fauci. Do you really think it's appropriate to use your $420,000 salary to attack scientists that disagree with you?
The email you're referring to was an email of Dr. Collins to me. If you look at the email
that you responded to and hurried up and said, I can do it. We got something in Wired magazine.
No. I think in usual fashion, Senator, you are distorting everything about me.
Did you
First
ever
of all-
object to Dr. Collins' characterization of them as friends? Did you write back to Dr. Collins and say, no, they're not friends, they're esteemed scientists, and it would be beneath me
I did
to
not
do that? You responded to him that you would do it.
The last time we had a committee, or the time before, he was accusing me of being responsible for the death of 4 to 5 million people, which is really irresponsible. And I say, why is he doing that? There are two reasons why that's really bad. The first is it distracts from what we're all trying to do here today, is get our arms around the epidemic and the pandemic that we're dealing with, not something imaginary. Number two.
No, that's not what you're there to do that day. The Senate is there to provide oversight on the officials that operate the public health departments. So it's part of the checks and balances that's in the Constitution. Dr. Fauci would be somebody appointed by the executive branch, and then so the Senate is there conducting oversight on his conduct. So Rand Paul is there doing the correct thing, asking questions about how Fauci, as a public official, chose to handle the information that he was getting and how it was reflected in public policy. That's what the Senate's supposed to be doing. Fauci is dead wrong here. This is not just supposed to be a powwow, all put our arms around each other and, kumbaya about stuff. That's dead wrong that he said that. So.
What happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have threats upon my life, harassment of my family and my children with obscene phone calls because people are lying about me.
It's disappointing for you to suggest that people who dare to question you are responsible somehow for violent threats. I was at the ball field today. Steve Scalise almost died. The person who shot at us and almost killed Steve Scalise was a rabid supporter of Bernie Sanders. But the one thing you'll find if you look at the record is that not one of us accused Bernie Sanders of being responsible for that. So this is the kind of ignorant sort of personal attacks that you've engaged in. You engaged in these attacks with fellow scientists. Not only was it 3 scientists from Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford that you chose to malign, 50,000 scientists and medical doctors signed this petition. And what they wanted was something that most Americans think is pretty reasonable. It's a different kind of approach. Instead of saying that everyone is the same and everyone should get the same treatment and everybody ought to just get vaccinated, what it did is it said that the death rate for this disease is extraordinary in the risk being different according to ages. So if you look at an 80-year-old, it's at least 1,000 times greater death rate than it is for a 10-year-old. So wouldn't we want to say that, well, we're going to assess the risks of each individual and have the treatment according to that, or would we just simply say everyone should be vaccinated? Many Americans wonder why you've steadfastly refused and worked with others to try to hide any kind of knowledge of natural immunity and how it would affect our decision-making. Now, the idea of natural immunity is the idea upon which vaccines are based. We've believed, and all of medicine is based on the idea of acquiring natural immunity. People often respond and say, but you don't know how long it'll last. Well, we don't know how long vaccines will last either, and that doesn't make us anti-vaccine. We do know that the vaccines are waning very quickly in potency. We do know that the vaccine against Omicron really isn't preventing transmission. You've noticed that the debate has shifted, and the debate is now talking about trying to prevent hospitalizations and death. And I agree with those statistics. I think it's a good idea if you're at risk to be vaccinated. I've always been pro-vaccine. I'm just simply against authoritarianism and against mandates. Right. The anger that's developed with you, Dr. Fauci, is that you don't want to give us advice. You want to tell us what to do. You think you are the science, and that anybody responds to you, how dare you? How dare you criticize science? As if you somehow are science. That kind of arrogance, that hubris is really, that's where the anger is coming towards you. If you were one doctor among hundreds of doctors in the government who gave advice, I don't think people might object to your advice, but there wouldn't be such a degree of anger. But you are so certain that you're right that you're not willing to hear anyone else. 3 epidemiologists, of which you are not even an epidemiologist, but 3 epidemiologists prominent in their field, Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard. You maligned them. You spoke openly with Dr. Collins, and you did not disagree that let's paint them as fringe. You went after them and said, we will do a public takedown, not in Science or Nature or Lancet, in Wired, in The Nation, a left-wing publication. You've engaged in base politics. You wonder why there's so much anger? You're not an objective scientist. You've lost that long ago.
So now I want to show you another clip of Fauci during a Senate hearing where he's asked about his communications with Mark Zuckerberg over at Facebook. And Fauci acts like, it's no big deal. We just talked about like normal public health stuff. It wasn't anything about censoring certain information or promoting, it was about promoting public health. It wasn't anything nefarious. So here's what Fauci has to say about those emails with him and Mark Zuckerberg.
The tech industry carries so much clout. They are monopolies as ones are defined. I mean, when you have markets that you control over 70, 80%, that is so much not only economic power, but it is a lot of other power that goes along with it. When you have any case where the federal government gets in cahoots in any way with big companies like that, that is almost unheard of. And generally the government would try to do something about that. In February, Facebook included new criteria for removing misinformation, and part of it was about the origination of the COVID virus, which now has gone from what they were declaring as misinformation to maybe the way we think it actually occurred. And Facebook has said that they've made consultations with leading health organizations. Was your organization, NIAID, one of the leading health organizations Facebook consulted with when deciding what speech to filter through?
There was one communication or two, perhaps, with Mark Zuckerberg in which he emailed me and wanted to know if there's anything that he could do. I believe it was promoting vaccination or making sure people do the right thing, wear masks, but it was mostly propagating a public health message. It had nothing to do with the origins of the virus at all.
And then do you, on a very frequent basis, consult with him either via email or do you have his cell phone number, for instance?
I have exchanged a few emails. You probably know that because you're asking the question. About 10,000 pages of my email have been FOIA'd. And in fact, there is an email exchange or two between myself and Mr. Zuckerberg.
My point is, an entity like that, and we've got 190 million users here in the U.S., and they are getting into the fray on so many things, and they are the classic example of where there's too much concentration within one entity. And in years past, we've done something about that, not just let it kind of run its course, and we've never had any of the big monopolies get involved with filtering or censoring speech to boot.
It says on Tuesday, Republicans on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform released a letter that paints a damning picture of U.S. government officials wrestling with whether the novel coronavirus may have leaked out of a lab they were funding, acknowledging that it may have, and then keeping the discussion from spilling out into public view. The letter was followed by pages of notes on emails that were first obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, but were heavily redacted. The redacted emails included the agenda from a February 1st, 2020 telephone conference between the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease Director Anthony Fauci, his then boss, former National Institutes of Health Director, and several of the world's leading virologists. The communications contained extensive notes summarizing what was said during the call, but their substance was hidden at the time. On that call, virologists Michael Farzan and Robert Gary told Fauci and Collins the virus might have leaked from the Wuhan lab. It might have been genetically engineered, the transcription of Gary's notes suggests, but this now seems unlikely. The email is out of context, Gary wrote Wednesday in an email to The Intercept. It was one email among many I was sharing with my colleagues. I don't understand how that's a defense to what you said, how that's out of context. What was the correct context that we should be putting that in to reinterpret what you said, like, at face value? That's a Hillary Clinton level of BS that this Robert Gary is spinning here. Said the day before the call, Scripps Research infectious disease expert had warned Fauci that the virus may have been engineered in a lab, noting that he and several other high-profile scientists all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. As they discussed what to present to the public, the scientists determined that questions of potential lab origin might prove more trouble than they're worth. The major feedback we got from the February 1st teleconference was, 1, don't try to write a paper about this at all. It's unnecessary. Or 2, if you do write it, don't mention a lab origin, as that will just fuel to the conspiracies. Again, they think the public's too sensitive, too dumb to understand this, so they're censoring certain information that they just don't even want you to consider because you might get the wrong idea about it. And here on Fox Business, it says top Republicans on the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees penned a letter to Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg Wednesday asking for the company to hand over communication between Zuckerberg, Facebook employees, Dr. Fauci, and other health officials. The request comes after emails between Fauci and Zuckerberg show Zuckerberg soliciting help from the nation's top infectious disease expert to promote access to reliable health information for its users. Lawmakers want to know if Fauci influenced Facebook's decisions to ban posts from users questioning the origins of the COVID-19, claiming the virus was engineered. Portions of communications between Fauci and Zuckerberg were redacted before being released as part of a FOIA request, raising questions from some Republicans who wonder what extent Facebook and Fauci were collaborating. Now, I don't see why that's just a question that only Republicans would ask. To me, that's a question that everybody should be asking. I'd also like to know why those emails are redacted, because the excuse that they give for those redactions is that it's a matter of national security. But last I checked, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have national security clearance, so Fauci shouldn't be talking to him about that. And if you guys were just talking about the best way to promote access to public health information, I don't understand why you would need to redact that from the public and what it is you don't want the public to see that you were talking about. But their level of censorship and control over the conversation, it isn't just limited to the COVID-19 narrative. I'm going to show you this clip of this guy, Sam Harris. I'm not even exactly sure what his qualifications would be. I know he's sort of a I don't know that he has a news channel like Tucker Carlson, but maybe like a Ben Shapiro or one of those more influential intellectuals on the left side of the conversation. And here's a clip of the Jimmy Dore show where they are breaking down his appearance on a podcast where he is talking about how it's a good thing that the media censored the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Here's what he says about censorship. If it agrees with his point of view, it's good. Watch this.
Hunter Biden, at that point, Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared, right? It's like, there's nothing. First of all, it's Hunter Biden, right? It's not Joe Biden, but even if Joe Biden, and I don't care whatever now. Scope of Joe Biden's corruption is, like if we could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly and understand that he's getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's deals in Ukraine or wherever else, right? Or China.
So that's him revealing that he did in fact know this was about Joe Biden. He just said it wasn't about Joe Biden.
That's dumb.
And I just said it's either dumb, ignorant, or he's lying. And now he reveals he does know it's about Joe Biden. And he was just lying.
It is infinitesimal compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in.
That's not even close. You're wrong. In fact, in fact, Joe Biden would be the bigger war criminal and more corrupt than Donald Trump. Isn't that crazy? You know why we have black and brown people overflowing our prisons? It's because of Joe Biden, not because of Donald Trump. You know why you can't get rid of your medical debt and your student debt in bankruptcy? That's because of Joe Biden. That's not because of Donald Trump. You know who killed more people in the Middle East, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? That would be Joe Biden. Who put more kids in cages, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? That would be Joe Biden. Who deported more Hispanics, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? That would be Joe Biden.
There's just it doesn't even stack up against Trump University.
Trump University, worse, not as bad or worse than Epstein Island.
University as a story is worse than anything that could be in Hunter Biden's laptop, in my view.
Now,
right? It's still completely unfair to not have looked at the laptop in a timely way and to have shut down the New York Post's Twitter account like that. That's just a conspiracy. That's a left-wing conspiracy to deny the presidency to Donald Trump. Absolutely, it was. Absolutely.
Great job.
But I think it was warranted.
Hey, at least he says.
And,
at least he
and again,
that.
it's a coin toss as to whether or not
Sam, I'm sorry.
that particular piece.
I'm really sorry. I was the one that said we should move on, but you've just
Okay.
said something I really struggle with there, which is
the kids in the basement.
Fuck the kids in the basement. I'm interested in democracy. You're saying you are content with a left-wing conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically re-elected as president.
Well, no, I'm content. Well, but the thing is, it's just not left wing, right? So Liz Cheney is not left wing, right? Liz Cheney is doing.
That guy, you see his face?
This is excellent eye roll.
So now he's going to split hairs over if it's a left-wing conspiracy or a right-wing conspiracy. So you're okay with people blocking democracy for their own partisan views, right? That's the question. He knows that's the question.
I'm content. Well, but the thing is, it's just not left wing, right? So Liz Cheney is not left wing. Right, Liz Cheney is doing everything in her power
to prevent somebody being democratically
it's not but there's nothing conspiracy. It's not. It was a conspiracy out in the open. It doesn't. But it doesn't matter if it was. It doesn't matter what part's conspiracy, what part's out in the open. I mean, I think it's like if people get together and talk about what should we do about this phenomenon. If an asteroid hurtling toward Earth, and we got in a room together with all of our friends and had a conversation about what we could do to deflect its course, right?
What if there was a guy running for president you didn't like, and then a bunch of you got in a room to decide what we could do? That would be called a conspiracy.
Conspiracy theory isn't synonymous with wrong. It's just that you have a theory that two or more people work together, colluded with each other in order to make something happen. So, by definition, if you think Donald Trump conspired, colluded with Vladimir Putin in the 2016 election, you're a conspiracy theorist. You have a theory that hasn't been proven that two or more people conspired with each other to achieve their outcome. So here's an article about these Twitter files and how these conspiracy theories are absolutely true. So one of the journalists who helped release Elon Musk's Twitter files said the emails and other documentation he reviewed brought him to conclude the federal government was in the censorship business. And not just one agency. Really, every conceivable wing of the enforcement agencies of the U.S. government were in some way or another sending moderation requests to Twitter, and in many cases, those requests were being fulfilled. The requests were coming in from everywhere within the enforcement bureaucracy, he said, naming the NSA, Department of Health and Human Services, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security. Twitter also had internal guidance in late 2017 that put forward a different public message about content moderation than how it was behaving privately in the wake of Russiagate. They had an internal guidance, which I think is very significant, where they said publicly, we will only remove content at our sole discretion. Privately, we will remove any content that's identified by the United States intelligence community as a foreign state actor conducting cyber operations. So if the intel community says we should take it down, we're going to take it down. Taibbi said, I'm deeply disappointed. I think a lot of people who are sort of politically on that side of the aisle are missing the boat on this. They don't understand the gravity of the situation. They're thinking about this in partisan terms. It's not a partisan story. This is a story about the architecture of the intelligence community and law enforcement getting its hands on speech and on the ability for people to communicate with one another through platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And now I'm going to read to you this other article of a guy that wrote an opinion piece about it and why this story is such a big deal. And I think he did a nice job, so I'm just going to read some excerpts from his post about it. The files confirm there's something that we'd previously only learned through a lawsuit. That Twitter and other tech executives were having regular monthly and even weekly meetings with not just the FBI and its Foreign Influence Task Force, the 80-person counterintelligence division made to combat foreign disinformation campaigns, but pretty much every security agency under the sun. One of those agencies happened to be the OGA, or Other Government Agency, something both Twitter's emails and former officers made clear was the CIA, which Matt Taibbi writes was nearly always present at these regular meetings with every major tech firm you can think of. Far from merely listening, the CIA was an active participant, regularly kicking off the meetings with a briefing. The result was a deluge of censorship requests from the FBI. The Bureau sent over lists of hundreds of problem accounts to Twitter executives, often so lengthy they came in the form of Excel spreadsheets and thousands of mostly domestic reports, despite the fact that this task force was meant to be focused on foreign influence. The significance of this should be obvious. Many short-sightedly dismissed the first Twitter files release about Twitter's outrageous censorship of the New York Post on the grounds that because the government wasn't involved, such censorship shouldn't concern us. That premise is wrong, but even if we were to accept it, the fact that the FBI and a host of other shadowy security agencies are clearly knee-deep in the decisions over what Twitter and the other companies decide to censor. There are also questions about the roles of agencies like the CIA and NSA. They are meant to be foreign-facing spy services that are at least nominally barred from turning their powers on Americans. Yet here they are clearly taking part, to different degrees, in domestic-based operations. While this enmeshment should be alarming, what's abundantly clear from the documents is that the phenomenon these agencies were meant to be combating, foreign disinformation, is not. In a routine that became familiar during the War on Terror, when finding itself short on actual threats, the FBI desperately looked for and sometimes invented such threats and pressured Twitter personnel to do the same. To accept this precedent is to accept that any future White House can press Twitter or any other social media firm to remove accounts it decides is spreading misinformation. Political suppression, if allowed to get a foothold, always starts at the outer edges of what's acceptable before bit by bit expanding to envelop legitimate but dissenting voices that it was supposedly never meant to target. That's like that famous quote, first they came for this group, then they came for this group, then they came for this group, and each time the person's saying and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a part of that group. So they went after these people, I wasn't one of those people, so I didn't say anything, I stayed out of it. And then as it goes down, then when they finally come for you, there's nobody left to stand up for you. And that's how governments take over and commit horrific genocides against people, and especially when they're able to get the public to go along with it. It's that bit by bit ostracizing people out of society, getting people comfortable with it slowly until they have total control over your lives. So now getting back to COVID-19, I do want to talk about a few of those conspiracies that they were censoring from the public conversation. Like when people say that you can shed your vaccine and then it can sort of vaccinate other people, or that if you get vaccinated, then that gives you an increased chance of getting COVID, or that getting the COVID vaccine affects your fertility, and they just act like these are anti-vaccine charlatans who are making this up to profit off of people. But I'm going to show you now quickly the scientific studies where these concerns are brought up. So I'm not saying that these people are correct. I'm saying they didn't make it up for profit to manipulate the public. It's the information that they're basing this off of comes from a study. So if they are misinterpreting this study or this is a faulty study, then come out and discuss it from a scientific standpoint. Don't just call them crazy conspiracy theorists and try to make them look dumb. The severe acute respiratory syndrome associated coronavirus, which is SARS-CoV epidemic, was controlled by non-vaccine measures. Such vaccines prevent major challenges. Coronavirus immunity often wanes rapidly. Individuals needing to be protected include the elderly, and vaccines may exacerbate rather than prevent coronavirus lung immunopathology. So right there it says the vaccines may exacerbate rather than prevent. So that is why people think that you get like an enhanced version of the virus after you've been vaccinated. It says a phenomenon of enhanced disease has been observed in cats following previous infection, vaccination, or passive transfer of antibody. So again, enhanced disease once you've been vaccinated or previously infected. The phenomenon is not fully understood, but is believed to be a result of enhanced uptake and spread of the virus through binding of virus antibody immune complexes. The observation that infectious virus is shed in the feces of SARS-CoV-infected individuals raises concerns that a live vaccine strain may also be shed in feces, with potential to spread to unvaccinated individuals. So there's that conspiracy theory is addressed in the clinical trial data. And then for the fertility issues, the fact versus fiction. Says rumors have been circulating online that suggest COVID-19 vaccines currently available in the United States cause infertility and are not safe for women who are pregnant or planning to become pregnant. However, multiple medical societies and governing bodies in the medical profession have debunked these claims, stating no current scientific evidence supports them. It says, so if experts agree that authorized COVID-19 vaccinations are safe for fertility and pregnancy, where did the rumor come from? The idea first gained speed in December 2020 when a German physician joined forces with former Pfizer employee to ask the European Medicines Agency to delay the approval of the Pfizer vaccine. Their concern was with the potential protein that I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of, but they argued it shared a similar genetic code with part of the spike protein in the COVID virus. The same protein is also an important component of the placenta in mammals. They argue that if the vaccine causes the body to make antibodies against that protein, it might also cause the body to attack and reject a protein in the human placenta, making women infertile. One of the issues with this claim is that if the antibodies attack the placenta, then that means the placenta actually formed, which means the patient got pregnant, said Hector Chapa, a clinical assistant professor of OBGYN at Texas A&M University. So it wouldn't be a cause of infertility, which is the inability to conceive and become pregnant. The issue would be pregnancy loss. So what this man is saying here is you're not going to become infertile. Well, you're going to be able to get pregnant. Like being infertile means you can't get pregnant. You'll be able to get pregnant. You're just going to have a miscarriage once that placenta gets formed and the spike protein, the antibodies attack the spike protein. So they're telling you it's false that you're infertile because that means you'll never be able to conceive. You're just going to miscarry when you do. So for the layman, I see why people are concerned about that. I don't think they are conspiracy theorists for not being satisfied with the answer that you're not infertile, you'll just be subjected to a life of miscarriages. I looked really hard to find this one article that I read a long time ago that I mistakenly didn't bookmark or screenshot, but it talked about the 4 steps of coercion, kind of go on the theme that we initially started talking about of the psychological manipulation that they do. It said to break it down to 4 steps, first you just have to scare everybody, which would be, putting the constant death toll on the screen and locking everybody down and drastically changing their lifestyle and telling them how deadly this virus is going to be. Then the second thing that you do is you try to manipulate to people's goodwill, that you're a good person if you do something. So that's all the people who are targeted with the propaganda that you're doing this to protect other people. You're saving people's grandmas. Even though they never tested for the transmission, like we talked about in the last episode, they still lied and told you that. And since they didn't test for it, to me, the only other real possible motivation is they are going through these steps of coercion, and we scared people. Now let's try to appeal to people's goodwill towards others. And now, as we're going to watch in this next clip here, the third step, after you've scared everybody, and then you've gotten the people that are going to do it to protect other people, or because they were told that doing so makes them a good person, now you got to bribe the next group of people. And so we're going to watch this video that goes through all the different ridiculous incentives that they gave to people in order to try to get them vaccinated. Raffling off taxpayer money, give you free donuts because we care about your health, Like, that's supposed to make sense. Like, go to New Jersey and get a free case of beer. So all kinds of bribery techniques. And I understand why some people were motivated to get vaccinated if they were in fear, or they did think that they were protecting vulnerable people in their family, or the people that were subject to the step 4 that we're going to talk about here after this video. But the people that I have the least respect for on the planet are the people that went and got vaccinated so they could get a free donut. Like, no respect for those people at all.
We need everyone to get vaccinated. So we know we have to make it convenient. We know we have to make it easy. We know we need the opportunities for people to speak to their trusted community voices, doctors, et cetera. We're doing all that. But we also know that incentives help. They really do. And so we've been announcing free tickets, gift cards, all sorts of incentives to encourage people. A lot of people are ready to get vaccinated. They just haven't gotten around to it. They need a little extra incentive. We're doing that now.
For the last 2 weeks, owner David Kullitz has been giving out Jell-O shots to his customers who have gotten their COVID vaccine shot.
Show us that vaccine card, or show us a selfie or a Band-Aid, anything that shows that you got poked, and we'll give you a nice little treat.
And it's not just small businesses. Kroger, the company that owns and operates Fred Meyer, is also giving out $100 to their employees if they get fully vaccinated.
Others are offering those who are vaccinated discount beer, popcorn, or arcade tokens.
Monday, anyone with vaccination proof can get not 1, but 2 free donuts from Krispy Kreme every day until September 5th.
We will announce the winner of a drawing of all those 17-year-olds and under who have been vaccinated, and the winner will receive a full 4-year scholarship to any one of our state universities. We will announce a winner of a separate drawing for adults who have received at least their first dose of the vaccine. And the winner each Wednesday will receive $1 million.
Did you say free fries when you get vaccinated? I got vaccinated. You're saying I could get this? These delicious fries? Wait a minute. But there's also a burger element to this. I want you to look at this and think about, again, some people love hamburgers, some don't. Really want to respect all ways of life. But if this is appealing to you, just think of this when you think of vaccination. Vaccination. I'm getting a very good feeling about vaccination right this moment.
And then the 4th step of these coercion techniques are then obviously the force. So you get people, you scare them, you convince them they're a good person if they do it, you bribe them, and then everybody else, you just force them to do it, whether through loss of your job or making you a social pariah. So in the first video, I had said that we would come back to the fact that it infuriates me how they use these propaganda techniques on children, and we're going to watch here in this next clip how they're sort of like blackmailing these kids, like first keeping them out of school, saying like kids really want to get back to school, we need to get them all vaccinated because they really miss their friends, they miss the social environment. So to get these kids back to normal, we got to get them all vaccinated. And the ones that if you don't want to get your kid vaccinated, that's totally fine. We're not going to force you to do it. Just your kid has to wear a mask. So that way everybody's going to know. And then they'll become the social pariah from all of their friends that, oh, we don't want to hang out with the dirty unvaccinated plague rat who has to wear the mask in the class all the time. So it's just a way to publicly identify and ostracize these kids. And especially when you're a kid, adolescence is already hard enough, and so now of course you want to fit in, so now you are going to go pressure your parents into like, please get me vaccinated so I can just like fit in and like be with my friends and like one of the normal kids, not the only one sitting in the corner having to wear the face mask that can't be within 6 feet of anybody.
What would you say to parents who are considering getting their kids vaccinated now?
I would encourage all parents to get their children vaccinated. I know many parents are enthusiastic and have been texting me, can't wait to get their children vaccinated. I recognize that some parents want to sort of see how it goes first, but I am encouraging all parents to get their children vaccinated. Some parents won't want to be first, but I'm also encouraging children to ask for the vaccine. I have a 16-year-old myself, and I can tell you he wanted to get the vaccine. He wants his life back. These kids want to go back to school. They want to go back to the things they love. For those children who are not able to be vaccinated, they can and should wear a mask in those school settings, and we have said that in our guidance.
And now I want to show you this clip. It's a guy that I like, Dave Smith, who's on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he talks about how despicable it is that the government has openly admitted that they're suspending the Bill of Rights during the coronavirus pandemic, and then they're using our rights as a carrot on a stick to dangle in front of us to get us to do things. So if you want to get your freedoms back, you better do what we tell you to do, which is the opposite of freedom.
I'll tell you what I can't stand, which just like makes my blood boil, is when they use your basic freedoms as a negotiating tool. Like they're like, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, then maybe we'll let you have restaurants.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll let you do this. Like, who the fuck are you?
Get back some of your freedoms.
Like now you're using my freedom as a carrot on a stick to get me to do what I want to do. Like, what type of sick shit is that?
Yeah.
Look, this is, and I think objectively, the country went totalitarian for about a year. Now, not every single part of it was as totalitarian as the rest, but according to governors, out of their own words, they suspended the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And we've been in a year living under that. Like, how long do you think we can go in living in a totalitarian society before that's just what our society is?
Yeah.
And there's not really a memory of the old normal, or at least that seems like the old times. That's not who we are anymore.
Right.
We're already dangerously close to that position. And now we have this opportunity where it's like, hey, Joe Biden says that everyone who wants to take the vaccine will be able to take it, I think, by June, he said. Everyone who wants it will be able to take it. And that's a perfect little opportunity point to go, okay, so we break out of it now. Now we break out of it. Now you can make a sound argument that if the vaccine's available for everybody, the people who want it can take it, and the people who don't are choosing to take the risk. And now we go back to normal life. And at the same time, they're proposing this vaccine passport, which really, if you look at the proposals, isn't a passport, it's an app, right? With your medical history, with that can, your data can be tracked, your location can be traced, all of these things. But what they're talking about doing now, when we have this fork in the road, we could go back to being a free country. Not as free as some of us would like, but at least the way we used to have it, right? Or we can go to what is being proposed and talked about, which is a national caste system, where there's one group of people who have basic freedoms and rights, and one group of people who do not. They don't have the freedom to travel. They don't have the freedom to go to events, maybe not to work. Ideas have been floated out about grocery stores. That's a national caste system. And also just, throwing away the idea that you have any type of medical privacy from the government. This is it's being done in collusion between big businesses and governments. And this is already happening. It's being done in New York City. It's being done in other countries. And there were reports in the Washington Post, in CNN, about the Biden administration meeting with these big businesses to say, oh, you know what, it's not really good enough to do a local level or a state level thing. We need to have one national standard. So you're talking about a national caste system. And if we embrace that, man, I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I think this whole thing is fucked. I really think this whole country, we are not going to come out of this. If we embrace the idea of now, this is an idea straight out of the Chinese social credit system. This is what they're proposing we do. By the way, China already has the COVID passport. This is what China does. That's it. No sense of you have a right to do this or you have a right to not do that. And come on, you think they're going to take that power and then this will only ever be used for the COVID vaccine?
I want to finish up this episode with just a couple of more clips and to kind of lead into what our last topic is going to be about, which is the possible motivations for why the government might have crafted their COVID vaccine narrative in the way that they did. And I'm going to start with showing you this clip just from Jimmy Dore. It's not very long, where he just talks about how it's not really virtuous to be an incurious rule follower who just doesn't question authority and does what they're told.
And how soon do you need a booster after you get vaccinated? 2 months. After you get vaccinated, you should get a booster in 2 months. Now, do you remember when they rolled out these vaccines? Did they tell that to people that you're going to have to get a vaccine 2 months after you should get one? And then, every couple of months you should get another one. And this time next year, you'll be on your 4th dose. They didn't tell anybody that.
Well,
they
that
made it
Canadian
seem.
guy,
What's
remember
that?
that Vax Dad or whatever, the Canadian guy was like, how many more we got to get?
I don't know. Don't care.
He was honest about it.
Yeah. I'm an incurious rule follower. I don't care. When has that ever backfired for people to follow rules blindly? I have some Kool-Aid for you.
There's smart people.
It's not just cults and Jim Jones. That's literally the entire basis for how the Holocaust was able to happen. I have these screenshots from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum where it says, shortly after rising to power in 1933, Hitler created his propaganda ministry, headed by Joseph, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, I'm just going to say Goebbels, I don't know, but we all know who I'm talking about, the propaganda minister for the Nazi regime. Nearly all aspects of German culture were subject to the propaganda ministry's control, including films, theater, music, the press, and radio broadcasts. Given tremendous leeway by Hitler and utilizing modern techniques and technologies, Goebbels quickly set out an ambitious agenda to indoctrinate the German people into Nazi ideology and to influence the behavior of the entire society. So I've been told before that, there's no way that what I think is going on could be true because that would require the entire media basically to be in on this, and journalists wouldn't do that because they would be interested in being the ones to break this story. And I just want to say, historically, that's not how it goes. That's not human nature. They go with the program. Hitler was able to control basically 98% of the media and the publications at that time, and they say history repeats itself. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's definitely happening, but you just can't rule it out because there's no way that could happen. Historically, it already has happened, so there definitely is a way that it could happen. Goebbels created a massive propaganda campaign to win the loyalty of German citizens and their acquiescence into Nazi anti-Jewish measures. At the same time, viewpoints in any way threatening to Nazis, police, or to the regime were censored or eliminated from all media, especially the public press. Pretty similar to today. As when Nazis came to power in 1933, the German Constitution guaranteed freedom of speech and freedom of the press, just like we have here now. So again, you can't say that our Constitution protects us from this. Historically, those types of rights enshrined in the Constitution are not exempt from takeover from a corrupt entity. It says, through decrees and laws, the Nazis abolished these civil rights and destroyed German democracy. Another criticism, well articulated by Harold Nicholson, was that the German propaganda brought short-term impact at the cost of long-term credibility. The German propaganda method is based upon seizing immediate advantages with complete disregard of the truth or of their credit. Our method is the slower and more long-term method of establishing confidence. For the moment, the Goebbels method is the more successful. In the end, ours will prove decisive. So he is saying, his criticism there is that the Nazis, they just take whatever is happening and spin it to their advantage. Doesn't matter if we get proved wrong later. People have short-term memories. The news cycle will change quickly. So we can just say whatever we want to cover our butts for this particular story. Who cares if it's not going to make sense with what we tell you tomorrow? And if you don't see that that pattern is going on in present day news media here in the United States, then I don't know what to tell you. You need to open your eyes to that one. So now I want to read the 11 principles of Nazi propaganda because, again, there are a lot of parallels, and I think the more people are aware of these tactics that are used against us and against the public at large, the easier it is to spot them when they're happening to you in real time. So, principle of simplification and the single enemy. adopt a single idea, a single symbol, individualize the adversary into a single enemy. So basically like QAnon. Like everybody that disagrees with us is just a QAnon conspiracy theorist. The principle of transposition. Load on the opponent your own errors or defects, responding to the attack with the attack. If you can't deny the bad news, invent others that distract them. So that's the long way of saying accuse the other side of what you're doing. So they talk about that, like if somebody is cheating on their significant other, then they tend to start accusing their significant other of being the cheater. And so it's just, that is one of those psychological tactics that you do to discredit the other person. It says principle of exaggeration and disfigurement. Turn anything, however small, into a serious threat. Sort of like the January 6th attacks. People just walking through the Capitol, staying between the velvet ropes, and all of a sudden that is the biggest threat to democracy that's ever happened. It says the principle of popularization. All propaganda must be popular, adapting its level to the least intelligent of the individuals to whom it is directed. The larger the mass to convince, the smaller the mental effort must be made. The receptive capacity of the masses is limited and their understanding poor. In addition, they have a great facility to forget. Again, great facility to forget. People have short memories. That's what they're talking about there. And one of the other groups that Hitler and the Nazis were trying to target were the intellectuals, because those people were able to see through their bullcrap. You want your propaganda to be able to convince the lowest common denominator, because if you try to appeal to the intellectuals, they're always going to question what you're saying and be able to see through your nonsense. So you have to keep the propaganda level to appeal to the lowest level of intelligence in society. Orchestration principle. Propaganda must be limited to a small number of ideas and repeated tirelessly, presented over and over from different perspectives, but always converging on the same concept. This is also where the famous phrase comes from: if a lie is repeated enough, it eventually becomes true. Sort of like get vaccinated for others would be an example there. Principle of renewal. New information arguments must be constantly broadcast at such a rate that when the opponent responds, the public is already interested in something else. The adversary's responses must never be able to counter the increasing level of accusations. Oh, just like they would do to Donald Trump. They would throw all these things out of the wall. He works for Putin, all kinds of examples. And then the news would always come out that, oh, no, the Hillary Clinton actually made up the rumor and she paid somebody to write those news reports that Trump worked for Russia. But by the time that news comes out, the news cycle is so far gone, people don't care anymore. They're already talking about something else. Principle of silencing. Silencing on issues on which there are no arguments or disguising the news that favors the adversary. Also counter-programming with the help of related media. So we talked about that a lot in this video. If you don't have a good counter-argument, you just prohibit it from being talked about in the public square. And lastly, the principle of unanimity. To convince many people that they think like everyone else. So if you just put on the news all the time, like the polls, Hillary's got a 99% chance of winning, that makes everybody think that like, oh, well, this is what everybody else thinks. I don't want to be the only one. Nobody agrees with me. So you start to second guess yourself. And it turns out that they are just using propaganda to tell you what outcome they want to have and to convince everyone that it's just a foregone conclusion. So like I said, I just want people to be aware of those propaganda, manipulation, psychological coercion techniques, because when you're aware of them, it's easy to see them when they're being used on you, and you can put up your defense mechanisms so you don't become a victim to it. I appreciate everybody watching this middle installment of this series of Genuine Question videos. And I hope you tune in for the last one, where we're going to discuss the possible motivations that the government has for trying to manipulate all of us in this way. But before we close out, I just want to play one last clip from Tim Dillon's podcast, where he actually has a pretty serious moment here and makes a really good point about this human nature and how history does repeat itself, and there's just this element to humans that are easily manipulated by this type of propaganda.
And the thing with human nature is funny. You know, whenever you give people the smallest idea that they're doing something altruistic or that they're doing something for the greater good, they will literally justify anything. That's when they'll just go and commit a genocide. If they think that they are doing something that's for the good of society and you just give them that, you go do this and police each other, rat on each other, turn into citizen informants, turn into brown shirts, run around like the Stasi, yelling at kids on skateboards and pointing at people's faces and go, "Where's your mask?" Those are the people that put you in the camp. They are. Those are the people that throw you in a camp. And that's what you're seeing. Human nature goes there within a few weeks. Within a few weeks, people were relishing their new roles as the enforcers of the quarantine. They were calling the police on their neighbors. They were yelling at children who were standing too close to each other. They were just anybody that was having any public enjoyment out there in the world, they were going to go and try to rob them of that.